The wind slid low across the plains, not hard enough to howl but steady enough to whisper, pushing through the brittle winter grass and carrying dust against the walls of Caleb Rourke's ranch house. It rattled the loose boards of the barn and crept beneath the wide doors, stirring old hay and the sharp, sour smell of cattle. The sky above was settling into evening, the sun sinking toward the horizon and staining the clouds a dull copper, the kind of color that always made Caleb uneasy. He had learned long ago that pretty skies often came before ugly nights. Caleb stood in the barn doorway with his boots planted wide apart, sleeves rolled to his elbows despite the cold. His forearms were scarred and rope-burned, the hands of a man who had lived by work and force for decades. At his feet sat a crude wooden crate, hastily nailed together, its planks darkened with old stains. He had avoided looking directly at it all afternoon, busying himself with meaningless chores, mending a fence that didn't need mending, checking water troughs that were already full, but now there was nothing left to do but face it. Inside the crate lay the last reminder of a problem he had tried, and failed, to bury weeks ago. The barn behind him was quieter than it should have been. No shifting hooves, no lowing cattle, not even the restless snort of horses. The animals had been uneasy since the first steer was found dead, hide split open and marked in a way none of them could explain. After that, the herd had grown skittish, eyes rolling at shadows, refusing to drink from water they'd used all their lives. Caleb had seen fear in animals before, storms, wolves, fire, but this was different. This was the kind of fear that spread. "Don't do that, please." The voice came from behind him, thin and shaking, and it cut through the quiet sharper than the wind ever could. Caleb's shoulders tightened, but he didn't turn. Eli Mercer stood a few steps back, half in shadow, hat twisted nervously between his hands. The boy couldn't have been more than 19, all angles and nervous energy, his face pale beneath the dust. Caleb had taken him on the previous spring, after Eli's father vanished somewhere along the Santa Fe Trail. The boy worked hard and asked few questions, which was usually enough in Caleb's book. But tonight, his eyes were fixed on the crate, wide with something close to panic. "You don't gotta do this," Eli said again, swallowing. "Not like this." Caleb stared out across the open land beyond the barn. The fields stretched away, rolling gently toward the distant line of hills, all of it land he had fought for and bled on. He could almost see the shallow graves out there, where they'd put down 3 head of cattle already, each one marked with that same crooked symbol carved deep into flesh. He'd told himself it was sickness, or some cruel trick by rustlers, but deep down he knew better. He'd seen something like it once before. "If I don't finish this," Caleb said at last, his voice low and rough, "it won't end." Eli took a step closer, boots crunching softly on straw. "Sheriff Collins was here this mornin'. He's talkin'. Folks in town are talkin'. They're sayin' you're losin' your sense." Caleb's jaw tightened. He finally turned, fixing the boy with a hard look. In the fading light, his eyes seemed deeper set than usual, darkened by weeks of poor sleep and worse thoughts. "Sense don't keep a man alive out here," he said. "Endings do." Eli flinched at the tone. "That thing, whatever it is, it ain't natural. Burnin' it won't make it go away. What if it makes it worse?" Caleb let out a humorless breath. "You think I don't know that?" He crouched and rested one hand on the crate, feeling the rough grain of the wood beneath his palm. Even through the boards, there was a faint, wrong weight to it, as if it held more than iron should. "Back in New Mexico," he continued, almost to himself, "there was a spread near Las Cruces. Cattle dyin' strange, brands showin' up where no iron had touched, men disappearin'. The old ones said if you don't destroy the mark, you leave the door open." Eli shook his head. "Old ones say a lot of things." Caleb straightened slowly. "And sometimes they're right." He grabbed the crate with both hands and dragged it across the packed dirt toward the fire pit behind the barn. The wood scraped loudly, the sound echoing too much in the still air. Eli followed a few steps behind, his protests growing quieter as the flames came into view. The pit had been prepared hours earlier. Caleb had stacked dry mesquite and pine, soaked it with pitch, and lit it just as the sun dipped low. The fire burned hot and steady now, flames snapping and curling upward, sending sparks dancing into the darkening sky. The smell of smoke mixed with resin and something sharper, iron heating, waiting. Caleb shoved the crate to the edge of the pit and pried the lid loose with a boot heel. The nails popped free with dull cracks. For a brief moment, the contents were exposed, and Eli turned his face away. Inside lay the iron brand. It was old, older than the ranch, its handle worn smooth by hands long gone. The metal head was shaped wrong, lines twisted into a symbol that hurt the eye to follow. Caleb had found it cut clean from the hide of the first dead steer, still warm, as if whatever had done it wanted him to see. Just touching it had sent a chill through his bones. Eli's voice came out hoarse. "Don't do that, please." Caleb ignored him. He grabbed the brand with a pair of tongs and lifted it free. Even in the open air, it seemed to darken the space around it. He thrust it into the heart of the fire. The flames flared higher as if in protest. The iron hissed and popped, glowing slowly from dull red to bright orange. The sound it made wasn't quite right, too sharp, almost like a cry if you listened too closely. Caleb leaned forward, face set, and grabbed a long poker. "Caleb, stop," Eli said, backing away. "This don't feel right." Caleb shoved the brand deeper into the coals, burying it beneath burning wood. "It's done," he muttered. "It's finished." The iron cracked. The sound rang out sharp and clear, like a bell struck too hard. At the same instant, the wind died. Not faded. Died, as if someone had snuffed it out. The flames in the pit shrank low, guttering strangely, and the sparks froze in place before dropping straight down. Caleb straightened slowly, his breath catching in his chest. The sudden silence pressed in around them, thick and heavy. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, and then went abruptly quiet. A chill crawled up his spine, the kind that had nothing to do with the cold. His instincts, honed by years of living on unforgiving land, screamed that something had gone wrong. Behind him, the barn door creaked. Caleb turned, and froze. Caleb turned, and for a heartbeat his mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. The barn doorway stood open, one door hanging crooked on its hinge, the other swallowed by shadow. Framed there, perfectly still, was a steer that should not have existed anymore. He had put it in the ground himself 2 days earlier. Its hide was caked with dried mud and clods of earth that clung to its legs and belly, as if it had hauled itself up from the grave by stubborn will alone. One ear hung torn and ragged, the same way it had when Caleb slit its throat to spare it further suffering. Its eyes were dull, glassy, reflecting the low firelight without recognition or fear. Steam curled from its nostrils in slow, steady breaths, though the night air had turned sharp and cold. Burned deep into its flank was the mark. The same twisted symbol, the same wrong angles, and now it glowed faintly, pulsing like a dying ember. Eli made a sound that barely counted as a voice and collapsed to his knees in the dirt. His hat fell from his hands and rolled away, forgotten. "It followed you," he whispered. "Burnin' it didn't end nothin'." Caleb's mouth went dry, his tongue felt thick, useless. He tried to swallow and couldn't. Every instinct he had told him to run, to grab Eli and put as much distance as possible between them and that barn, but his legs refused to move. He had faced stampedes, gunmen, and the slow certainty of drought, yet none of that prepared him for the simple impossibility standing 10 paces away. The steer took one step forward. There was no sound of hooves on wood, no creak of boards. It moved as if the barn floor no longer existed for it, as if weight and matter were suggestions rather than rules. The faint glow of the brand brightened, casting warped shadows along its ribs. Caleb felt something inside him crack, not the sharp snap of fear, but the slow collapse of certainty. He had believed, truly believed, that destroying the iron would sever whatever bound that mark to his land. That belief had carried him through the long afternoon, through Eli's pleading, through the moment he shoved the brand into the fire. Now it lay in ruins. "You should have left it," Eli said hoarsely, still staring at the thing in the doorway. "You should have left it buried." Caleb finally found his voice. "It was already buried," he said, though the words sounded thin even to his own ears. "And it came back anyway." The steer's head lowered slightly, not in aggression but in something closer to recognition. The glow along its flank spread, the lines of the symbol sharpening, burning brighter as if responding to Caleb's presence. A low sound rolled out of its chest. Not a moo, not a growl, but a vibration that set Caleb's teeth on edge. From beyond the barn, the darkness stirred. At first Caleb thought it was his eyes playing tricks on him, shadows stretching where they shouldn't. Then he heard it. The faint scrape of movement across dirt, the soft shuffling of many bodies. Shapes began to emerge at the edge of the firelight, more cattle, outlines familiar and wrong all at once. Some limped, some dragged stiff legs that should not have bent at all. Every single one bore the mark. Eli started sobbing, the sound raw and broken. "There's too many," he said. "There's too many, Caleb." Caleb forced himself to move. His boots felt like they weighed 100 pounds each, but he stepped forward, placing himself between Eli and the advancing shapes. His hand went to his hip out of habit, fingers closing around the grip of his revolver. The familiar weight steadied him, even as he knew how useless it would be. "Get up," he said quietly. "Slow. Don't turn your back." Eli shook his head, frozen by terror. "They ain't supposed to move like that." "No," Caleb agreed. "They ain't." The first steer took another step, then another. The others followed, spreading out as they emerged from the darkness. The fire pit crackled weakly behind Caleb, its light shrinking as if ashamed to witness what it had helped unleash. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of turned earth and burned hair. Caleb's mind raced, digging through memory, through things he had tried hard to forget. New Mexico, a spread outside Las Cruces. An old vaquero who'd spoken in half-whispers about marks that weren't meant for flesh, about doors that once opened did not close easily. Caleb had laughed then, young and sure of himself. The ranch burned 3 weeks later. No bodies were ever found. "Listen to me," Caleb said, more to himself than to Eli. "This land, it's mine. Whatever you are, you don't belong here." The steer closest to him stopped. Its head tilted slightly, as if considering his words. The glow in the brand pulsed brighter, and Caleb felt a pressure build behind his eyes, images pushing at the edge of thought. Wide open plains under a blackened sky, men pressing hot iron into screaming flesh, symbols carved not to claim ownership but to summon. "You didn't end it," a voice seemed to say, though no mouth moved. "You called it." Caleb staggered back a step, his grip tightening on the revolver. He raised it, aiming squarely between the steer's eyes, and fired. The shot cracked loud and sharp, echoing off the barn walls. The bullet struck true, and passed straight through, kicking up dust behind the animal. The steer didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Eli screamed. Caleb fired again, then again, emptying the cylinder in a blur of sound and recoil. Each shot did nothing more than punch neat holes through dead flesh. The cattle continued their slow advance, indifferent to the noise and violence. The realization settled heavy and cold in Caleb's chest. This wasn't something that could be fought. Not with lead, not with fire. The ground beneath his boots began to vibrate, faint at first, then stronger. The brand on the nearest steer flared white-hot, and the others answered, their marks lighting in unison. For a moment, the ranch yard was bathed in twisted symbols, glowing like a constellation drawn too close to earth. Eli crawled backward until his shoulders hit the barn wall. "What do we do?" he pleaded. "Tell me what to do." Caleb lowered the revolver. His hands were shaking now, openly. "I don't know," he said. The words tasted like ash. "I thought I did, but I don't." The first steer stepped past him. It didn't touch him, didn't brush his coat or bump his arm. It simply passed, moving toward the house beyond the barn. The others followed, flowing around Caleb and Eli like a slow, unstoppable tide. Wherever they stepped, the grass blackened and curled, the ground smoking faintly. Caleb turned, watching them go, his heart pounding. They're heading for the house. Eli scrambled to his feet. "That's where the brand was kept," he said suddenly, panic sharpening his voice. "Before you burned it, in the cellar." Caleb's breath caught. The truth slammed into him with brutal clarity. The iron hadn't been the source. It had been the key. Destroying it hadn't closed the door, it had flung it wide open. "They're going to finish what it started," Caleb said. The last of the cattle disappeared into the darkness, their glowing marks fading one by one until only the dim firelight remained. The night air rushed back in, cold and biting, as if the land itself had been holding its breath. Eli grabbed Caleb's sleeve. "We gotta run." Caleb looked down at the boy, at the fear, the trust, the life he had taken responsibility for, and made a decision he never thought he'd face. He nodded once. "Saddles." Now, they moved together, urgency replacing terror. Horses whinnied nervously as they burst into the corral, sensing the wrongness lingering in the air. Caleb threw a saddle onto his mare with shaking hands, Eli doing the same beside him. Behind them, from the direction of the house, came a low, distant sound, wood splintering, something heavy forcing its way inside. Eli mounted up, eyes wide. Caleb, what about the land? Caleb swung into the saddle and took the reins. He looked once more toward the house, toward everything he had built with his own hands. Land can be reclaimed, he said quietly. Lives can't. They kicked their horses into motion, riding hard into the open plains as the first unnatural glow rose behind them, painting the night with twisted light. Caleb didn't look back again. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed. All a man could do was live long enough to warn the next fool who thought he could finish it.